Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Black Women's Mental Health Institute as we discuss voting and matters to our mental health. I am Tiffany Storey. I am the executive director for Storeyhouse Counseling and Consultant, which is basically a mental health firm developed to create resiliency and mental wealth in communities that are underserved. And do that through individual, group, couples, and family counseling. And today I am joined by Kenya Shavers with ACLU. And so Kenya and I are going to be talking about voting in regards to mental health. Kenya, will you take some time to introduce yourself and then just tell us a little bit about ACLU for those who may not be familiar and an example of the work that you guys do pertaining to voting? Oh, you're still on mute, Kenya.
That would be helpful. Absolutely. I want to, of course, say thank you to the Black Women's Mental Health Institute for having us today and really curating this conversation. Again, my name is Kenya Shavers. I serve as the Voting Rights Coordinator with the ACLU of Alabama. ACLU stands for American Civil Liberties Union, and we are known as Freedom's Watchdog. We defend the civil liberties that are guaranteed to us through the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And so we fight for our civil liberties through litigation, through policy, and really just building trust and building relationships in community so that folks know that we are here to support our civil liberties, the things that are guaranteed to us, to help be sure that our everyday lives are supported by what this country is supposed to stand on. A little bit about my work here at the ACLU as it pertains to voting. As I mentioned, I do serve as the Voting Rights Coordinator, and that means like all things to voting rights, all of our grassroots work, coalition work, policy work, et cetera. And so currently, we have a project called Project Move. Move stands for Making Our Voices Echo. And our goal is not just to get folks registered, but also to get folks to turn out to the polls. We know that Alabama has a grave deficiency in voter turnout. In any given primary election, we can see 37% of registered voters turn out across the state. And so we want to up those numbers, right? And in a general election, we see 60%, 60+% of those folks turn out in a general election. And so obviously that doesn't make for a good democracy. That doesn't make for free and fair elections. And so we want to be sure that people in our community know that voting is not a privilege, but it is a right, and that everyone exercises their right to vote. And so through our work, again, our goal is just to see an increase in voter turnout across the state.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about the work that you guys do. Thank you so much for doing the work in our community, especially for, someone who looks like me and you who come from communities where we've been oppressed, right? Our voice has been silenced or oppressed over the years. So it's so important to have people in the community advocating for us to continue to keep those privileges, right? Oftentimes I think when people think about voting, we think about how it affects us, in terms of economics. We think about how it affects us in terms of like gun rights or, violence, policing, those things. But I don't think oftentimes we understand just how important voting is when it comes to our health and well-being, right? So what are some examples of how voting directly ties to health outcomes, more specifically mental health outcomes, especially in Alabama, where the turnout tends to be low?
Yeah. I would argue that all of those things directly affect our mental health, right? When we vote for our public service commissioners, those are the folks who regulate our clean air, our clean water, the price of our utilities. When we vote for our county commissioners and our local congressmen, our statewide representatives in the state house, those are the folks who decide what the quality of our life will be, right? And so I would argue that based on our quality of life, you can see either a progression or a digression of our mental health. And so, um, through the work that we do in voting, it is my hope that we often associate our quality of life with our mental health. And so that means that we have to get out and vote for our public service commissioner, who's going to determine if we get a raise in our power bill this year, right? Because if that
Mhm.
bill is $300 this year and it was 150 last year, that's going to stress you out.
Ooh, baby. The power bill is powering,
It's
okay?
empowering. And so, to me, it's really important that we not only look and consider mental health from an actual health and wellness standpoint, but we think about our mental health and our wellness as a quality of life.
Sure. Thank you for that because I think so many times we don't realize how voting trickles down to us locally, right? Especially when we're watching major elections like the presidential campaign. We think of it as from like a macroeconomics perspective, right? Like on a larger scale, but we don't think about how voting really hits us close to home when it comes to our power bill or when it comes to our air quality or water quality, right? So when you think about some simple steps we can take when to be well informed on the issues or maybe even the rights or policies that are on the table, when we have current local um, politicians running for office or campaigning, what are some things we can do to be informed on what those issues are on the table, especially since some of the issues that are on the table when I think about abortion and things like that directly affect our health? How can we be informed and where can we go and how can we could or what organizations can we connect with to stay informed on those issues?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that the ACLU is doing across the state right now is being really intentional, and folks who have watched this have probably taken our survey. But we are talking to folks across the state to find out what issue is important to you. What
Mm,
issue is important to you? Is it mental health? Is it reproductive justice? Is it economics? Is it LGBTQ rights? And so the first thing is knowing what is important to you, right?
okay.
And knowing and understanding the policies around what is important to you, and then talking to local elected officials about those issues, but being sure that we address those issues with the offices that can actually do something about it. More often than not, our frustrations are real frustrations and they are valid about the things that we see in our community that we may not agree with, that need to be addressed, that aren't being addressed. But we are misplacing our frustrations in to the wrong people. We are talking to city council about something that we should be talking to our legislator about. We're talking to our legislators about something that we should be talking to our public service commissioners about. And so not only educating ourselves about the issue itself, but being sure that we are placing the responsibility and holding elected officials accountable for the roles that they play in our everyday lives. In addition to that, I would also say just get involved, show up, right? Show up at your school board, show up at your city council, show up at your county commission meetings. Everyone is having this national conversation right now about the presidential race, but we've got to show up in our local spaces. We've got
Yeah.
to show up in the spaces that control again our quality of life, that change our everyday lives. And so that's what I would say.
So as you're saying, we need to take some steps to show up for our local elections and being informed on the issues. What have you found that has been some barriers to why people don't show up and how that really affects us when we realize that we've let the opportunity pass, right? How are you seeing people respond once they realize the opportunity has passed and then maybe some policies are being set for that have a direct impact on them?
Yeah, so I'll share a little story. I, for the last several years, have worked across the country on partisan and nonpartisan campaigns, electoral and nonprofit. And through my work, most of it has been what we call in the field, on the ground. I've been knocking doors, making phone calls, really at people's front door, right?
Mhm.
And whether I was in South Georgia or Northern Virginia working, or right here at home in Alabama, I'm a native of Montgomery. Whether I'm right here in Montgomery, the general consensus that I've come to realize is that people have real problems and real issues, right? And more often than not, our issues are similar. If we sat here and talked long enough, we would realize that we are probably frustrated about some of the same things, whether we live in the same neighborhood or not.
Mhm.
And so, what we see is that because people have real issues that are not being addressed by the elected officials who are responsible and who we have elected the jobs, we have given them these jobs, right? We gave them these jobs with our vote, and they're not showing up for us in the way that they should. We see that there is a good bit of voter apathy.
Mhm.
Again, not just right here in Alabama, but across the country, there's voter apathy because the everyday frustrations, the everyday needs, and our quality of life, just as citizens in our state, are not being addressed. And so people don't want to talk to me when I come knock on their door, talking about an elected official or talking about a ballot measure, right? They don't want to talk
Mhm.
to me because their light bill is high, their rent is due, their kids need food, etc. And so, again, I believe that that is the disconnect, that
Okay.
our elected officials, the people that we have hired, right? We hired them through our vote, to work for us and to show up for us and to represent us, are not doing that. And so, folks don't have time to talk to you about the next election or the ballot measure, because they got real things to deal with. And so, a part of our work here at the ACLU is to address some of those things, to help close some of those gaps, in our work through Project Move, through our issue mining, talking to folks about what issues are important to them. We're taking that data and we're saying, okay, we see that this issue is important to you. Now we're going to show up in your community and help close that gap. This
Mhm.
weekend, we are going to be in Tuskegee doing a food giveaway, and also partnering with some health organizations across the state. Because we know if you live in Tuskegee, you got to either go to Auburn or you got to come to Montgomery for a hospital, right? That's a problem.
Wow.
That's an
Yeah.
issue that should be addressed.
Mhm.
And so we can't be the ACLU, and our partners across the state can't be the end all be all. We can't be the answer to all problems, but we can use our resources to help close some of those gaps. And our elected officials should be doing the same thing.
Wow. That sounds like taxing work too, right? I've done door-to-door sales. Okay, so I did that in college as a part-time job, and I remember walking up to people's house and watching them shut their doors, right? And so as a person that is like in the field, in the trenches, like advocating, tell me what you do for yourself personally to protect your mental health and to deal with some of the frustrations that are kind of being projected on you, because in that moment you are the face of politics, even though you're not directly connected to any campaign where you're going on behalf of the ACLU, you're an advocate in the community, but you're a face that represents maybe a frustration at the time. So, how are you prioritizing your mental health to make sure that you're able to stay in the fight and stay in the trenches and do the work?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. One, I always get my nails done. Listen, if y'all ever catch me outside and these nails are not done, I'm going through it. Okay.
Okay.
Pray for me. But also, I always say that prayer is my superpower. And I mean that. I pray about everything all the time. If you see me talking to myself, I'm probably talking to the Lord.
Okay.
And so I am constantly rooted in my faith. But more than that, and not more than that, but moreover, I don't see this work as a burden. I don't.
Mm.
I carry the weight of this work every day because I feel a responsibility to show up for my community. I feel a responsibility to help folks in my neighborhood when they're in need. People know that if I have a resource or connection to something, they can call me and I'm gonna make sure I help them. I am a means to an end, and I don't take that as a burden.
Mhm.
So I would say that although it is taxing work and it is heavy, I wear it proudly and I do this work proudly. But in order to be sure that I can continue this work and that I can sustain myself through this work, because it is something that you have to be in for the long haul. I've
Yeah.
been doing this work since I was 19, as a sophomore in college at Alabama State University. And so for the last 10 years, this has been what I've done. And so again, I don't wear it as a burden. I wear it as a mantle. I'm proud to do this work. I'm proud to show up for my community. But in the times when it gets rough and it gets taxing, I go into prayer and I go get these nails done.
Okay, well, I'm an advocate of getting my nails done. So I stay at the shop every 2 or 3 weeks. But what I heard you say is you prioritize spiritual self care and psychological self care by really managing your expectations and managing your perspective and keeping a healthy perspective on what sounds like not just your passion, but your purpose, right? And I think when you feel like you've been purposed to do something, it allows you to have a healthy relationship with that. But then some physical self care, right? With getting your nails done. Um, I think, as a Black woman, it's a different type of fight for us, especially when you have someone who looks like us that is also running to be um, a lead in this country for the one of the biggest seats that can be held in politics, which is president, right? And there's a lot of stuff that comes with that. There's a lot of rhetoric. There's a lot of conversations. You really start to see the divide because there's a lot of hate speech that begins, and so I can imagine that that is taxing. And so Therapy for Black Girls, which is a website or a organization that really promotes mental health, similar to the Black Women's Mental Health Institute for Black women, to prioritize their mental health, shared some tips on how to protect your mental health through this election season. And so I want to kind of share those. And Kenya, I encourage you as a mental health therapist to do some of these tips, because I think when you're a person in the trenches fighting a good fight, when you're a person like me who's constantly listening to people's trauma and like helping them process and kind of pouring from yourself, your cup gets empty, right? So, what's different ways that we can refill? Well, one thing, and I think this was important for me, especially during the time where the George Floyd killing had taken place, is learning when to disconnect. Like if you're feeling overwhelmed, anxious, or angry about what's happening in the election, or with election rhetoric, just limit your exposure by taking a step away from the news or a break from social media. I know people who, for different spiritual reasons, fast, and they do a social media fast, right? As a way of kind of looking inward and um, grounding themselves, right? So the first thing that is recommended is limiting your exposure to all of the rhetoric and election talk that's happening. Another thing that you can do is focus on your breathing. Oftentimes, when we're stressed and we're overwhelmed, what we don't realize is our body naturally responds to stress. And so our breathing is impacted, right? And if you don't have good oxygen flow to your brain's not functioning like it should be, right? And so we may act out of character, we may feel more overwhelmed. It affects our heart, it affects our organs and all these different things. So, take a moment to like focus on your breathing, taking those deep breaths, making sure that you're actually breathing like you should. A third step is prioritize physical movement or exercise, a walk, yoga, because when we exercise, when we move our body, right, it increases those feel good endorphins and releases those feel good endorphins in our brain and in our body, which are important for just simple processes, right, like sleep and digestion, right? And so just physical movement is a good way to be able to settle your mind and decompress, but it also helps your body function properly. Practice mindfulness, which is really the art of being in the moment or the here and now. A lot of times people try to make this word mindfulness, which is a buzzword these days in mental health, right? To be bigger than what it has to be. But it's just the practice of learning to be in the moment, right? And so you can do that um, in different ways, but engaging in exercises or activities that allow you to not be stuck in past situations or events, or always trying to check the next box, or you know be so future focused, but be present, present with the person that's in front of you, present in the conversation that's happening around you, present in the food that you're eating, present in the shower that you're taking, just being in that moment, allowing your space self to decompress and disconnect from everything that's happening around you, and just being in the here and now. And then surrounding yourself with community, or engaging with your support system, which I can imagine for someone who does the work that you do. And you kind of already said this, community is key, right? Like being able to close the gap in those communities where there are some disparities or some deficits when it comes to health and access to different things that should be, a part of our life. You have to connect with other people, right? You have to organize. And so surround yourself with community, engage your support system, and be sure to set boundaries in terms of like conversations or that may be triggering, right? If you're taking a step back away from the election, say,
Mhm.
hey, today is the day where I just want to be with my support system, be with my community, and be in the here and now, and
Yeah.
not have talk about the election, right? Like today we're turning that off. And so those are some of the tips that Therapy for Black Girls shared, that I thought would be helpful for us to like really understand. Yes, let's get out, advocate, let's vote, but also let's make sure we're taking care of ourselves, right? Because we don't want to uh, burn ourselves out in the process of trying to be um, uh, advocates of change. Anything that you can offer or that you think may be helpful for this conversation before we start wrapping up here, Ken?
Yeah, I heard you say at the top of this, as you were sharing some of the tips, grounding. And that is something that I do religiously. Every morning, I take my morning walk, no cell phone, no nothing, no nobody. I go find me some grass because I
Oh,
live in
look at you.
live
Come
in an
on.
apartment complex. I take me a walk, I find me some grass, and often I find, somewhere where there's some new scenery, right, in my neighborhood, in my community. And I soak my toes in the grass. I'm grateful my grandparents live on a small homestead. And so when I go to my grandparents' house, they know I'm gonna get out of the car and I'm gonna put my toes in the grass. And so that probably sounds crazy to some people, but if you try it, it'll change your life. And so um,
Yeah.
I would admonish folks to go find them some grass and literally go do some grounding, because that is also a practice that I use daily, to just help myself stay rooted, in why I'm doing this every single day. So,
Yeah, so my husband does that, and when he first started doing it, we lived in Inslee, and he just going out on the front porch with his robe, barefoot, and putting his feet in the grass. I'm like, "What you doing? You look
what are
strange,
you
right?" But
doing?
but it's a real thing, right? Connecting with the earth, letting the energy, that magnetic energy that flows from the core of the earth, flow through our body. Um, those things have scientifically been proven to help us, right? And so being in nature is a great way of grounding. Like putting your feet to the dirt, right, is a good way of centering yourself. So I'm glad to hear that you use grounding on a regular basis, and disconnecting, right? Like shutting out all the noise and allowing yourself to just look inward and have a quiet moment. And so I want to thank everybody that is attending today or tuning in to this conversation. Kenya, thank you so much for the work that you do. I am not a politics person. So I appreciate all my people that are in the fight, taking on the conversation, advocating for someone like me to be able to do what I do in this room of mine, this office, when it comes to mental health and it comes to impacting people's health and well-being. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for everything that you've contributed to this conversation, and just continue to do the good work, and we wish you the best.
Thank you so much. And I want to say thank you for the work that you do,
Thank
in
you.
keeping us grounded in this crazy world. I am forever grateful for my therapist. And so to have Black women therapists that see you, that hear you, that understand you. That is not go unnoticed. So thank you for the work that you do and your commitment to the mental health space. And thank you to
You're welcome.
Black Women's Mental Health Institute for having us as well. Again, I appreciate y'all.
Well, same for me. Thank you so much for allowing me to facilitate this conversation today, guys. And from my understanding, this is something that happens every week. So next week there'll be another conversation next Wednesday about voting. And so y'all please tune in every Wednesday at 12 so that you can discuss voting matters to your mental health. All right, Kenya. Well, I will see you later and enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Thank you so much. Talk soon.
Okay.
Bye.